How's it going, everyone? I'm Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel. So I review all different types of games on this channel, including a bunch of different games from various genres. So today, we're going to talk about a JRPG, specifically Tales of Graces F. Now, this review for Tales of Graces F comes courtesy of Lady Pelvic, who sent me this copy of the game on PlayStation 3, so big shout outs to her, thanks very much for that. However, if this game sucks, I'm gonna shave you bald. That's right, if it ends up sucking, I'm gonna shave you bald. You're gonna have to worry about your bald, stupid head. Let's talk about this game. Tales of Graces F is the 14th main entry of the Tales of series from Bandai Namco. Originally released in 2009, it was given the codename Tales 10 during its development, but if we're counting some of the sequels to previous Tales of titles, then it's the 14th one to be released. The funny thing is that Tales of Graces was originally on the Nintendo Wii in Japan, but was ported to the PlayStation 3 a year later and given the new name Tales of Graces F. This version eventually got localized for North America in 2012. Apparently, there was a recall in Japan for the original Tales of Graces on the Wii because of some bugs that were present within the game. It didn't matter in the long run though. Tales of Graces F is the definitive version of the game, which added a few new features and an epilogue story that wasn't included within the original release. That's pretty dope when you think about it. On top of this, the game also has some downloadable content in the form of costumes that were also localized for the North American release. It's crazy because the game was so popular that it also received 4 manga adaptations and a spin-off book series in 2011 and in 2012. They both adapt the story of the game and tell post-game stories respectively, which speaks volumes to how much fans of the series love this game. But is this really a testament to the quality of the game itself? In some ways it is, but in others it definitely is not.
Are you troubled by the outcome of our last bout?
Yeah, I want to know your reasons for fighting me, but more than that, I want to defeat you.
Ah, is that pride I hear? Very well then. The more we fight, Asbel, the more deeply your ego will bruise.
So at first glance, I really like the colorful visuals and the upbeat tone of the entire experience. Even in some of the game's more darker moments of the story where things can get very serious overall, it still has this upbeat tone and just very whimsical tone about it throughout the entire time I was playing. That's something I thought was actually very cool. If things keep up like this, I'm not really gonna need these, which is a great thing. Then again. But before we get into gameplay, there's a couple things I want to talk about specifically with the story, because there is a lot to say about it. The story in Tales of Graces F is probably not going to be for everybody. If you have a thing against anime-esque stories with repeated character tropes and archetypes, then you're probably not going to want to play through this. But if that doesn't faze you, here's what Tales of Graces F is all about. The plot takes place in the world of Ephenia, with 3 countries that are in a constant state of political unrest and tension, mostly dealing with the rise of monsters. While that's part of everything at the start, the overall story focuses on the friendship and changing relationships between a group of friends from their childhood years to when they become full adults. The centralized theme here is friendship, which might sound cheesy and typical for people who frequently watch anime. Our main character is Asbel, the son and successor of a lord in the village of Lant, alongside his brother Huber. The two of them discover a mysterious young girl who appears out of nowhere and has amnesia, who they later name Sophie. Her appearance sets in motion a series of events that affect the lives of all 3 and others that they come to meet, including the Prince of Windor named Richard, Asbel's childhood friend Sheria, the knight instructor Malik, the tech expert Pascal, and a few others. The story introduces us to most of the cast we stay with throughout the game somewhat early on, at least before things start to get a little wild. After a time jump of 7 years following some pretty traumatic events, we find Asbel and his friends growing into the roles that will come to define them and influence their fate throughout the story. If you're hoping for a long plot that stretches over many hours, you'll definitely get that here. My only major issue is how the story tends to drag and suffers from a number of filler sections. There were many times where I felt like nothing was happening at all, and it'd take hours before something big would move along with the plot. I had to force myself to push through these parts of the game that were like this, only to find that sometimes it didn't always have that big of a payoff.
Hey, not cool! Where'd this stupid sandstorm come from? Look, over there.
Unfortunately, there is a lot of moments that tend to drag on for way too long. In order to get to the good stuff, you have to power through a lot of these long, drawn-out, very boring sections that just go on for way too long in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, there's some good stuff in there that's very cool with some of the characters, some of the action moments, there's some good stuff there, but as long as you're able to power through all these crazy moments where you're just going to feel like nothing's happening, then it's going to be a little bit much for some people. Some of the best moments come from the tension between different characters where things start to get really crazy and really serious. Certain characters and the relationships really start to break down and there's some big fights. That's when the game is at its best with the story. The extra thing about this are the different skits that you see that are the dialogues between different characters at various points of the game. What's cool is that these are fully voice acted, even though they're not full cutscenes, at least you know the bulk of them aren't, but at least they give a little bit more backstory and stuff about the characters that showcases their personalities or whatnot. Like I mentioned before, if you're not really into anime tropes or different character archetypes that you typically see in anime series, this might not be for you. There's a lot of rinse and repeat type of formulas and styles and stuff, and other things that are very predictable. But as long as you're okay with that, you'll be totally fine with this story. I don't think it's really bad or garbage by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not amazingly good. You know what that means. Anyway, let's get into gameplay and let's start things off with the exploration that you're going to be doing throughout this entire JRPG world. If you played any of the Tales games before, then chances are you already know what to expect here. You'll be wandering around in a variety of places within the world of Afinia. While I appreciate the colorful nature of the environments you visit, my biggest issue comes with how overly big and dull some of them can be. Certain places are just way too big to navigate. Walking through them feels like it takes a long time just to get to the next area, mostly because of your walk speed and the design of the overworld and dungeons themselves. They just look monotonous the majority of the time. It doesn't help either that the game doesn't give you a minimap or a layout in the menus of the areas that you visit. You kinda just have to wing it and remember key points that you see while exploring. I'm not a fan of this because the dungeons with confusing layouts can easily be fixed by this. It's why so many other role-playing games have some sort of map that you can easily access and pull up while you're exploring. I had to refer to a guide frequently to get through these dungeons without wandering around aimlessly. It just got annoying when everything looked so similar within the most outlandish layouts for the dungeons. Seriously, this became a real pain towards the later half of the game. My other criticism related to this is the backtracking. I know this is a staple of most JRPGs, and I'm cool with that, but Tales of Graces F makes you needlessly backtrack way too much in my opinion. There were a few places I had to revisit for something very minor, only to be forced to walk through a long area back to the next point of interest. This really extended my playtime significantly. I felt like some parts that require you to return back to a specific spot after an event could have just teleported you there to continue the story, not make you tread all the way back for almost no reason. I get these are prime moments for you to level up your characters in combat, but fixing this could have easily saved a good 5 to 10 hours of playtime that was just wasted on walking through areas over and over again. And finally, there's the fast travel, which I feel like takes way too long to access. I've said the same thing about other JRPGs I've reviewed in the past. It can be very annoying when you need to get through at least so many hours before you could fast travel between areas that you've already been to. It's more of a matter of convenience than anything else, especially when you're required to go back to the first few towns you see from earlier in the game. That's definitely a nitpick of mine, but this could have been easily handled so much better and allowed the game to flow into the deeper plot a lot easier.
The fate of Afinia rests in our hands. It's kind of terrifying to think about. But you don't have your scared face, Sharia. That's because I'll be facing it with all of you.
Alright, I think we're all finished with preparations. Now, let's do this.
Yeah!
Right. Wait, hold on.
Come on, Hubert.
Now I know you could use the turtles at some point early on in the game to fast travel between different points, but it's not always readily available to you and it's not always as convenient and intuitive as one might hope. One of the big problems I have with this is the menus, where everything just feels a little bit disorganized and just very confusing at first. Unlike a lot of other JRPGs where it's a little bit much more convenient and easy to navigate to different spots that you could fast travel to, as well as also able to do that much earlier in the game, it just feels like in Tales of Graces F, things just are very confusing. You either have to go through a list where you have to just go all the way down just to get to something specific, especially when you're trying to continue the story where, again, things tend to jump around all over the place mid to late game. I just felt like this entire thing could have been tidied up a little bit better and made a lot more easier to navigate and use while I'm going through the game. So guess what, guys? But what about the rest of the gameplay? What about the combat specifically? Okay. If there's one part in Tales of Graces F that I feel is either extremely good or extremely bad, it would be with the combat. I really like the idea of getting into battle and fighting in real time, especially when I'm able to freely switch control between characters when I want to. I also like how the combat in Tales of Graces F centers on you getting big combos with your different A and B arts on enemies. This is a neat concept on paper. However, all of this comes crashing down because of a few key factors that nearly ruin the combat for me. The first is the movement and the targeting, which I feel like could have easily been fixed with one simple solution. Let me move around freely. While in combat, you can only move forward and backwards from your enemy. You have to switch targets in order to move in a different direction. You could dodge to the side and change your position, but this is not as easily as freely moving around with the analog stick. It's frustrating when you should be able to evade attacks by moving to the side, only to get hurt because of how limited and restrictive your movement feels. I get it that most Tales of games are like this, but when you can move around in 3D space, this is definitely a problem. At the start of the game, this isn't too bad, but later when you start fighting larger groups of enemies, this could be very, very bad. It doesn't help that the camera can be a hindrance when you're attacked by enemies out of view. Sometimes you'll get hit by damaging combos you just can't react to because you can't see them in the moment, which more often than not could lead to your death. Yeah, that happened to me on more than one occasion. The other big problem here is the Elith burst meter. My god, this thing is both confusing and a real point of annoyance for every battle you get into. The idea behind it is that every time you attack, get hit, block, or dodge attacks, you build up meter that can open up a massive boost to your entire party. This gives you stagger immunity to attacks, upgrades your critical hit rate, and allows you to execute limit-based attacks that do big damage. This is great and all, but the downside is that your enemies could do the same thing just as easily. It's a constant struggle to stay one step ahead of your foes and capitalize on anything you can do for a big perk. Here's the problem though, the Elith gauge fills up so fast for most enemies that you'll see them burst more than a few times within battle, and you can't do anything about it. You have to wait for it to wear off in order to regain control of the fight. I know that you could boost your own Elith gain with different items and equipment, but that often doesn't matter. Enemies could be so much faster than you gaining Elith and how frequently they use their burst. This gets super cheap with boss fights when you're in danger of being hit with a limit attack that decimates your entire party. I kid you not, some fights had bosses do this multiple times to me in a fight and wipe out my entire party, forcing me to restart the battle. It's like a guaranteed hit for them that you can't do anything about. To me, this just feels like something that needed to be adjusted on more than a few occasions, because defeats like this that you get from enemies that flat out overpower your entire party feels very cheap and out of left field. While I understand what they were trying to do with the combat and try to see what they could do to mix things up and make it interesting for this Tales game, I never fully grasped the combat system or felt like I really got it to the point that I could use it to my advantage all the time. Whether I had just spent only a couple hours with the game all the way through my 50+ hour experience, I never fully felt like I really got a good grasp on it. It felt like I always had to find some way to cheat the system or find some sort of weird kind of offset type of thing that maybe you weren't really supposed to do in order to get by through some of the game's tougher fights. Now, mind you, I'm playing this game on normal difficulty. Some people have suggested you kind of lower the difficulty to easy, but I always try to at least, have a fair view of different games when I'm playing on the normal difficulty setting, rather than just easy or hard. To me, I don't think that you should have to change the difficulty setting in order to enjoy a game or at least be critical of it. But with this one, I could totally understand where people were coming from, because certain battles that I was getting into just felt very cheap and just very annoying because of this type of stuff. One of the big contributing factors to this was the fact that you could only hold up to 15 of every single item on your inventory. That's stuff like gels, stuff like the life bottle, and a couple other helpful items that I could have really used in much more abundance. I'm not really a huge fan of that. It just seems very unneeded to put that restriction on there. Maybe other Tales games, I don't really remember, have this type of restriction, but to me, why not allow us to have more than that? Why not allow us to have 99, since most other JRPGs allow us to do so? I guess that means that we get to do this now, don't we? Anyway, moving on from that, let's talk about some of the extra content that you get in this game. Now, the only real bonus content you get in Tales of Graces F is an extra story called Lineage and Legacies. This is an epilogue to the main story that takes place about a year later. You can only access it once you finish the final battle in the main game. It adds a good number of hours to your playtime since there's more story and exploration for you to do. I won't get into specifics because of spoilers, but there's some fallout from the events of the final battle you see in the main game. Here's my problem with it though. The extra story feels like it overstays its welcome with the characters. The majority of it has you revisiting previous areas, but it's not until hours later when you get to go visit someplace new. There's a lot that happens with the plot, expanding more about Asbel and his friends. and yet I feel like the story of the main game was fine the way it ended beforehand. If you stick through it to the end of Lineage and Legacies, the finale gives you a satisfying conclusion to every character in some way. But once again, I find that the gameplay is what bums me out about this whole thing. The new places you visit are long and can be more frustrating than ever before. It's here where the boss fights and enemies tend to get very cheap in combat. I'm talking status effects that weren't a problem before, random new abilities that pop out without warning, a Elif game that'll make you cry, and so many other things. It's not impossible to get through all of it, but it's extra hours in the game that will make you hate certain aspects about it. When you're done, however, you're really done with the game. Everything is wrapped up and you get an almost poetic conclusion based on how the game originally started. It's very anime and will satisfy anyone that has come to love these characters, but for me, it doesn't take away with how rough the journey was in getting here.
Well, all right then. I think that's my cue to leave.
While I appreciate that Lineage and Legacies is there for you to enjoy as post-game content in the main game, these are some of the most annoying and frustrating fights with any enemy in the game whatsoever. Like, oh my god, they're just so annoying and like cheap. The worst part of this is the final boss fight that you have to deal with at the very last section of Lineage and Legacies. Like, the boss just throws all these curveballs at you that you're not really prepared for. There's also another problem with the collision detection between this final boss and a few other enemies that you run into, where all of a sudden some of your attacks just straight up don't work because they can't reach it, because all of a sudden you're getting pushed back from certain portions of the mesh of that character. To me, that just seems very broken and very annoying and just super frustrating after I spent so much time with this game. Admittingly though, once you get through all this different stuff and you finally reach the end cutscene, it does seem like everything gets wrapped up rather nicely, especially if you've been a fan of all these characters up to this point. I mean, you're spending more than like 50 plus hours with them. If you're not really all in at this point with these characters, then again, there's no help for you whatsoever. You're not really gonna like it if you don't like what's happening here. I guess we all know what this means. So after everything that I've said, can I recommend that you guys check out Tales of Grace's F on PlayStation 3? While I really enjoy the colorful visuals and the upbeat tone throughout the entire experience, there's a couple things that I feel like bogs everything down. I think that the gameplay's combat could be adjusted to be a little bit more fair and not as frustrating in certain sections, as well as also the exploration could have been really adjusted and tidied up to not only flow a little bit better, but make things a little bit more intuitive. If you're not someone that's into anime tropes or archetypes or just anime storytelling in general, you might not be all in with the story here, but if you can look past that type of stuff, or if you played other Tales games, then maybe you'll like what's going on here with some of these characters. It might not be for everybody. Would I recommend this be somebody's first Tales game? I don't really necessarily think so. I think there's other better Tales games out there that could probably be a better introduction into the series, but if you've already played a bunch of the games, or even just a few of them, you'll probably get a lot of enjoyment out of this. Anyway, people, those are my thoughts about Tales of Grace's F on PS3. I hope that you all enjoyed watching this video review. Big shout out again to Lady Pelvic for sending this over to me to review for you guys. Hopefully everybody, including her, got a real kick out of this review. Then again, I'm sorry LP, but this has to be done. But as always, those are just my thoughts about the game. Let me know what you guys think about it down below in the comments section. Tell me, are you a fan of the Tales of series? Is there a better Tales of game out there that you want everybody to play? What are some of your favorite JRPGs out there that everybody should know about? Tell me about all that stuff down below in the comments section. Thanks for watching this video, everyone. Go ahead and click the boxes on the side to see more videos and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to go visit my Patreon page for exclusive gaming content that I know you'll really love. Hope you have a chill day. Peace out and stay epic, everybody.